Thanks everybody for joining us on this presentation. Today we're going to be talking with Kevin Collins, who's the CEO and founder of Charlie AI, and Elham Alipour, who is the chief scientist at Charlie AI. Today's presentation is on the topic, can AI actually think? And we're really excited to go through our kind of line of thought and logic related to this topic and discuss everything we need to know about AI in the enterprise. Kevin, Elham, I'd love for you to introduce yourselves real quickly before we jump into the presentation.
Thanks, Patrick. Glad to be on here. As you said, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Charlie AI. More importantly, I'm a bit of a techie at heart and stay deep in the tech. Been involved in the realm of AI for many, many years, and it's certainly come along leaps and bounds in the last few years, which we've thoroughly enjoyed at Charlie AI.
And I'm Elham. I'm the chief scientist at Charlie AI. I've been working with Kevin for many, many years and enjoying that a lot. And my main background is in artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and multimodality. And I'm really glad to be here.
We have a jam-packed session today, and I'm going to just advance here to our next slide on this deck, which really starts to introduce our main topic today, which is where is AI today? And obviously, we're going to discuss where it's going in the future and what we all need to know as leaders. So let's kind of start there. Let's jump off. What is the current state of AI today?
Good question. I mean, even if you go back to the title of this presentation and the webinar, can AI think? My short answer is no. Can't think. I know there's a lot of hype out there in the market around artificial general intelligence, and we still have a long way to go to achieve sort of that mainstream definition of what AGI really means. And we can certainly talk through it. If we look at what AI is today, that hype, it's well deserved. There's a lot of great technologies coming out with large language models, the triformers, the ability to apply that within business has certainly shaken up the world and had a lot of people thinking about what the future of AI is. And that's well deserved. And we want to take advantage of that. But we're still a long ways away from AI truly thinking, reasoning, and we're still quite a ways away from that AGI concept.
I 100% agree with that. We're not there in terms of having AGI at all. There are a lot of limitations with the current technology that we have in AI, mainly the large language models that we have. The way that the limitation that they have for understanding the underlying reality of what they are generating. The fact that there's limitations related to dynamic data instead of a static state data, limitation related to outputting factual results. There are a lot of limitations that we need to think about. Does the same technology can resolve that, or do we need to think about new technology, new designs, new way of thinking to get there?
And so today, as we're employing the use of AI in varying ways across an organization or as individuals, there's really two ways that AI can be implemented. It's implementing a off-the-shelf or consumer-grade technology, or it's building something completely bespoke, or perhaps leveraging some existing models or LLMs to some extent. What does a leader need to know about each of those different strategies today? And what does that mean as we move forward, as technology evolves, as strategies inevitably need to evolve as well?
Just based on this strategy, even if you look at the presentation, number one there is consumer grade. There is a big difference between consumer grade and enterprise grade. And that comes down to managing risk, managing the data, knowing how the models are trained, knowing how the models are going to be applied. And a lot of that takes some sophistication within the enterprise. On the consumer side of it, you can have blog writing. You can manage those risks. It's publicly known data. You're getting a lot of benefits out of the technologies that are there, including ChatGPT. But when you move into the enterprise, you have to look at deep business optimization, very complex business use cases. The data has to be controlled, managed. You can't have that risk of hallucination within the enterprise, whereas you can accept that level of risk within the consumer side. You also, with the consumer side of it, you're doing a lot of prompt engineering, you're doing a lot of queries into these systems, you're feeding it data, and you can manage that on the consumer side quite nicely, but on the enterprise, you can't. You cannot afford the risk of prompts going into a public domain, queries, or even content going into the public domain. So you have to manage that within the enterprise. The other issue is that the world is very much laser focused on Gen AI, but when you go into the enterprise, it's an AI landscape. There's generative AI, there's extractive AI, predictive AI. There's a lot of different AI models that have to come together. So an enterprise has to look at a strategy that pulls these together and does that seamlessly for every business use case they have.
Exactly. Like generative AI, that's a really good point that you're making, Kevin. The generative AI is just one examples of AI in general. And to be able to satisfy a use case for the enterprises, you need to have multiple type of different AIs to be able to do so. And that's why that you really need a platform that you can utilize multiple type of AIs. And as Kevin mentioned, like in the enterprise world, privacy security is important, but also the other thing that is really important is just that your AI needs to be steerable or controllable so that you can have the AI in a way that satisfies an objective. So it has to be objective driven and not just a generic outputting result.
Just one other point. Sorry, Patrick, I know you had a question there, but I wanted to go back to one of the things you mentioned around a method of bespoke, building it yourself. And my answer to that is yes, you have to consider that. Uh, every single customer we talk to wants an innovation, and they want an innovative advantage over their competitors. And that does require customization. And there is a lot of opportunity for bespoke AI models to operate within the enterprise. The challenge and the opportunity is to make sure that they work nicely within a framework.
I think that is, I'm really glad that you bounced back and discussed that. It's such a critical element to consider and to make sure that what you're building is not just going to work for you today, but it's going to work for you and evolve with you in the future, both as technologies evolve, but as business processes and needs also change and evolve as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to bounce ahead. Go ahead, Kevin. My apologies.
Yeah, sorry. I know I'm belaboring it, but one of the things, even Elham and I have had lots of conversations around this. If you're looking at what that AI framework needs to incorporate, there's a lot of orchestration that happens. And the other key point you put on that slide was evolve. And your AI strategy will evolve rapidly, probably month over month. I mean, that's what it feels like. There's new models coming into play. You will want new models next year. And you have to have that orchestration ability within your enterprise to adapt to new models coming into play, to deal with things like data drift, concept drift, improvement in your predictions. Those will be new models. And your framework needs to adapt to that. You don't want to be re-architecting your framework over and over again. So you want to take advantage of new capabilities as they come into play.
Really well described and explained. Thank you. And the word orchestration jumped out to me there. We talk about this all the time, and it's related to the question that we have on the slide here, which is something we hear very frequently. How does AI learn? What does it need to learn? And I think we have some opinions on that. I'm going to give the floor to Elham, and then Kevin, I'd love to hear your counters or anything that you might say to add to the conversation.
Sounds that to me there are like different levels of learning that we can talk about, and then we can talk about like what AI can learn, and then is it in the same level of learning as a human can learn? Because as a human we are learning in different ways. We don't just rely on text, we rely on all these different models of data. Like in the physical reality, we rely on vision, on touching the words, like on everything, not just a text. And the other aspect that I want to mention is just that, like, when we learn something as a human, you can teach a human a new task with very few data. Like, you can just give a human a few examples and a human can learn. But the current state of AI, like these large language models, if you want these large language models to learn something, you have to give them like huge amount of data that at some point you have to stop yourself and think about it. That is it just a stochastic parrot and just mimicking whatever it's saying in the data? Or is it actually learning something new? Because and all of it comes down because it needs a lot of data to learn a new task, right? So that's a really great question. I know Kevin has some opinion about that, so I'm gonna let him first talk about it.
I love this opinion too. Let's hear
Yeah.
it.
It's I mean, Elaham and I have talked about this many, many times, and my opinion is more rooted in the layman's view of the world than it is in the technicality of the difference between static learning and dynamic learning. And my logical mind goes, I get it. I get the difference between static learning and dynamic learning. My layman mind goes, no, yeah, I can't learn worse. Shit. Oops, sorry. uh,
We
it's
can
not
bleep that
like,
out if we need to. We'll ask
yeah,
HR.
yeah, you can ask HR about it, but it's not from a layman's perspective. It's not learning the way humans do. So I completely agree with what Elham's saying. I don't disagree at all. I'm just being a little bit more out there in that it does not learn like a human at all in any way, shape, or form. Uh, and I've had a lot of discussions even with customers about this, and some agreement as well with customers that AI today is programmed. It's programmed to behave a certain way, to do a certain thing, based on the training data. So it's almost a force feeding. And I think, Patrick, I've talked to you about this in the past, and you came up with the term indoctrination. And it's fair, because you're basically force feeding a massive amount of training data into models that are predictive in their output and what they're doing. And you can see that even with the blog writing tools that are out there. If you do it enough times, you will see the pattern. I see it all the time.
Yeah.
And AI doesn't learn. I also have the advantage of being at an age where I have grandkids. And watching how the grandkids are learning is actually a fascinating experience. And I saw it the other day because I saw one of the kids pick up 2 water bottles that were half full. And you could see him staring at these things. And he starts shaking them. He's 2 years old. And he's just shaking them. He's looking at them. That's learning. He's adapting. He's doing even what Elham mentioned, the visual, the tactile, the sound, all of that becomes feedback into his brain in order to put 2 and 2 together, that reasoning or that critical thinking element. For me, that is learning. And AI is not doing that today.
I'm really interested in the topic of, oh, I went the wrong way on the slide. The topic of how AI learns compared to how humans learn. And Elham, you brought a point up, and Kevin, you just kind of reiterated there, that we learn through all these different sensations, sight, memorization, data input, context, right? And that's how we apply our all the data, all of our inputs. That's how we apply that into knowledge and information. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So, um, to be able, like as a human, when we want to make any decisions, when we want to reason, when we want to plan, like it's not just the data that we consider. Data is just one element, and data is not all the information that we get, right? Uh, Kevin later on is going to give a good example of what it is when we say data is not information and information is not knowledge. But more than that, you have to have a lot of context to be able to, based on the knowledge, to make a decision and to reason. And that context is really important. And that is what is missing in a lot of AIs right now, in my opinion. And we have to find a way to propagate that context so that the AI can actually think and make a decision.
Yeah, it's an important one. And one of our customers actually came up with this: data is not information, information is not knowledge. And it was a great conversation over dinner. And it fit nicely with our own thinking internal to Charlie. And if you think about the whole question around data versus information, Elham and I work with GE, and GE's stock trades at a certain value. So if I said from a data perspective, GE's price per share is, I don't know what it is today. I haven't looked it up, but let's say it's $12. You'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a data point. Now, is it information? Not really. I didn't really give you anything other than a ticker price, price, and that's like who cares? But if I told you the trend of the GE stock over the past year, I'd give you a little bit more information. So it now moves from just data to a little bit more informative. You can see a trend or a pattern. But is that knowledge? No, it's not knowledge. Because you have no context around what that means. Is the market declining? How is GE performing in the healthcare sector versus the aviation sector versus the energy sector? What is the stock market doing overall? And what are each of the sectors doing? And what are their competitors doing? All of that knowledge isn't there on the information. So you have to take data, you have to create more metadata around it in order to get some information, and then you have to build the context in order to create knowledge. You have to know the connective threads. And that, for me, is critical. What are the relationships between different information elements in order to build up knowledge about something, or to relate knowledge in one area to knowledge in another area? We know that's difficult to do. We've been tackling that problem at Charlie for many years now, and we've seen the light on where this can actually come together. But it's extremely difficult to get to that knowledge and to use that knowledge.
One thing I want to emphasize is just using that knowledge. Like getting to that knowledge is really difficult, but when you get there, what do you need to do with that? One thing that like a lot of like all use cases in an enterprise needs is planning, which is also another missing piece in the current state of large language models and generative AIs, that they're not able to plan complex tasks. And that's another missing point that like we have to really think about it. When you have the knowledge, how do you want to utilize it? What do you want to do with it? if you have a complex task, how can you break it down into simpler ones so you can execute it? And that's where the context again comes into the play, because for each use case, like the context might be very different from one to the other, and you have to consider that to be able to make any decision.
Really strong point, and it is a perfect segue into our next topic, which is how can we give AI that context? What type of, I guess, information and data is useful for artificial intelligence, and how can we ensure we're giving the right information to the right program to get the right, output that we're looking for?
There's many ways to do that. We can't divulge some intellectual property around that. You have to understand, as you're receiving data, you have to be able to turn that into information. That's going to be step number one, obviously. But then you have to start doing relationships between one set of information and another set of information. And you have to build that up through an experience. And that experience is going to tie into a number of things. Similar to how a human would be experiencing information over a period of time and building up context, an AI can do the same. And that means that data is fluid. Now, if you think about the world of AI as it is today, it's not really built on the fluidity of data or information for that matter. It's really a known set of information that is being curated and going into models in order to produce a predicted outcome. That's an oversimplification. I do get that. But you have to build a system that can, in essence, flatten the data and the information and build up that context dynamically. And this is the fluidity part. Context is an ever-changing thing. People's perspective on that information is different. And one of the examples we provide even within the banking sector, which we do a lot of work in the financial services industry, and we know that there's retail banking, commercial banking, there's underwriting, capital markets. There's a lot of different views on the world of data. Everybody wants data, but their perspective of what that data means as far as information goes, completely different. The information they need, completely different. Even though they might require the same data, the use of that information is going to be for a completely different purpose. And it's going to be related to different things. Even though the same set of data might be going into commercial banking versus underwriting, they're totally different perspectives on how they will use it. Commercial banking is going to be working with the clients. Underwriting is going to be making sure that the risks are managed and met. Therefore, their use of that information is quite a bit different. So the connective threads, that context has to adapt from one case to another case. It can't be fixed. And you have to have a method to be able to derive that context. And that's where we're starting to get into knowledge at that point.
Love how you explain that, Kevin, because a lot of times when people talk about fluidity of data, they only focus on the fact that data can change over time and there might be a data drift over time. But time is not the only factor here. Like the concept is changing based on who is going to use it, based on how they are going to use it, like what's the use case. Like there are many different factors that you have to consider, and the data is going to change based on that.
To that point, let's move on a little bit. Similar topic. It's really just kind of building upon what we just discussed, which is kind of what is the difference between machine learning, ML, and artificial intelligence, AI? And then where does Charlie fit in? And how do we introduce the topic of, or the concept of true AI? Let's talk about that topic a bit.
So I know we briefly talked about this diagram, and it's a well-known diagram that wraps everything up, the difference between AI, machine learning, deep learning, the subsets of each. I'm going to jump straight to the world of AI, because machine learning and deep learning, from a layman's perspective, are really just methods that can be applied. In the world of AI, there's a couple of things here that I would argue with. It says a program. That's not my view of the world. I believe in the 1,000 brains strategy. I don't want one model or one program knowing all, because I don't want the bias. I don't want that situation. I like the 1,000 brains. Similar to how a group of people, a team of people come together and they do brilliant things. It's a team of models that do brilliant things in the world of AI as well. Yes, they can sense patterns. Very much a pattern element to what AI is doing today. But there isn't any reasoning happening in that world of AI, or even the act and the adapt. And I know Elham's going to talk about the act part, which is critical, I think, in the world of AI, and not what you're seeing in the consumer side of the fence today. So there's many things that are not happening if you're looking at the AI side of the fence.
Yes, I agree with that. Like, first of all, like having just one AI model to do everything, it's as if you say that like there can be only one human that is specialized in every aspect of the world, which we know right now that it's not going to work. Like in the human world, that's not working. So it's the same way of thinking that a specialization needs to happen in the AI world. And then if you have like a diverse team of AI models, then that's going to result in a much better output at the end of the day. And as Kevin was talking about, yes, right now the AIs, they can sense patterns, they can generate output, they can predict, but what to do with it? Like when you have like the result of ChatGPT, you need to do something with it. Right now, it's the human that needs to do the acting. Okay, I got the result. Now, what is it that I have to do with this? That's because a lot of these models, like they're missing that objective oriented thing that I mentioned before, that they're not to satisfy an objective. And that's what it's missing. The other aspect that is missing is that adaptability, that how they can adapt based on, as we talked about, like the context is changing over time, over who is using it, how they're going to use it. So these AI models, they need to be adaptable. They need to be able to change their output based on whatever situation they are in right now, they're considering right now. And reasoning is another factor that like we have to really consider. How much of a reasoning do we see in the current AI models that are out there? And it's that's another factor that we have to really look into and then see what are the missing pieces and work to resolve them.
So that begs the question, with the evolution of AI models, with the evolution from deep learning to machine learning to artificial intelligence to true AI, are we beginning to see intelligent computers, and are we at the early stages of true artificial intelligence or AGI?
We are. And as I said at the beginning, the large language models, the transformers, are a big step, and they're catching everyone's imagination, and that's warranted. So credit for that. We're just at the beginning stages, and we're scratching the surface of what the potential is. If we go back to what Elham was talking around the act, that is a big piece of getting the intelligence in AI, because you have to be able to do something in order to learn. So that doing gives you a feedback loop. And that's important in this dynamic learning. So if we're moving from static learning to dynamic learning, you need to be able to act. You need the feedback, not just from humans, but you need the feedback from actually doing something. So if the AI wants to be more self-sufficient, it needs to act and capture the feedback. So that's the adapt side of it. And even within our AI, we want our AI to act and we want the AI to adapt. And it adapts when it learns something, because it might be a oops. And that's a good way to learn as well, is you fall over, you do something. In the world of computers, you get an error. And that's adaptation that can be built in. We still have a ways to go, but that adapt, that reasoning is something that can be achieved, even though we're at the beginning stages.
Love that answer, and it's so insightful, knowing knowing that we are at the beginning stages of something that will just continue to evolve exponentially and rapidly. And with that being said, understanding that we are, way ahead of the curve in terms of, where things will be going, what do we need to know about using AI in a enterprise business application?
It needs to be embedded with the workforce. We always believe that AI is there to augment humans. There's a lot of work that we don't want to do as humans. It's repetitive, it's tedious, we're not good at it, mostly because it's repetitive, it's tedious, and we don't like doing it over and over again. And this is where you can have AI come in and augment. But if you have AI augmenting, then the human has a good feedback loop. The human has the ability to improve their decision making as well. And that's critical, because you've got AI helping you and surfacing more insights and information. Human decision making can really be supercharged. That was really built into our brand, is how to supercharge the human decision making capability by augmenting it with the AI. So you need methods of doing that. And that means the AI has to be embedded with your workforce where the teams are doing work. Yes, it's online, it's in your applications, it's going to be in your chat interfaces, in your email, not just in web apps or mobile apps.
The other aspect that I want to add is just that you have to think about whatever strategy you have or whatever framework you're going to use, it needs to be both flexible and controllable. Because in each enterprise, there are like different levels of regulations that you have to uh, uh, be compatible with. So because of that, it needs to be controllable, but it also needs to be flexible, because as we talked about, these evolutions of the technology requires that, so that like you can easily adapt to new models, new technology, new use cases.
I love that point that both of you brought up around, first off, the supercharging human decision making is so critical. And the fact that AI should be in support of that, not doing everything for us, is, I think, a cornerstone of what we believe in at Charlie AI. And the fact that your strategy needs to be both flexible and malleable, but also rooted in business operations and improving the overall enterprise is so critical, because just applying something to solve one small problem could actually bring other issues down the line if you don't think it through in a holistic and really well-informed way. Well, with that, I want to thank you both for spending so much time with us on this conversation and really illuminating a lot of really important topics that we should all be considering as it relates to AI in the enterprise. So, Kevin, Elham, thank you very much for sharing your insight and wisdom with us. And for everybody that's watched this, we want to thank you as well. You can learn more about what we do at Charlie AI at charlie.ai, or you can follow along with us on LinkedIn or on our podcast, The Wave, which is going to be hitting all podcast streaming platforms very, very shortly. So thank you, everybody.